If you've got a Rhaphidophora Tetrasperma or Monstera Minima, then this is a complete care guide to help you help your plant thrive. So I've got mine here and you'll see that it's grown completely off the moss pole and up onto the ceiling. I'll see if I can get a photo to overlay it on the video, and this secondary vine just here as well. So I'm going to run through the origins of the plant, the care tips that I've used to help it grow this strongly, as well as a propagation demo using one of the vines that are trailing off to show you how to propagate this and multiply your Monstera Minima for free. So these are easily mistaken for Monsteras, given the striking resemblance of the leaves to the Monstera deliciosa with the fenestrations, for example, and even the common name Monstera Minima suggests they might be related. They're also frequently confused with Philodendrons and even Epipremnums, given the growth habit with the vines, and even the shape of the leaves again, with some Epipremnums, for example the Epipremnum pinnatum, has a very similar leaf shape to these. They are a different genus, but they are all part of the same family, so they're all part of the Araceae family, which might be why they bear a resemblance to one another, so they share some of those features. So these are native to Thailand and Malaysia, although they have become popular houseplants around the world, and despite coming from those tropical, warm and humid conditions, they are relatively easy to care for plants. I will say easy with an asterisk because they do take some balancing with the water, which I'll cover in the care tips next. So we'll start with watering, as that's the trickiest to get right first of all, but once you've got that down, the rest of the care tips are relatively easy for the Rhaphidophora. Now, different sources online say different things when it comes to watering, which kind of contradict each other depending on how you interpret them. So I'm going to share what I've done with this plant. As you can see, it's a strong plant, it's got vines growing up to the ceiling, so I will share what I've done to keep this plant healthy. However, you obviously need to decide what's right for your plant depending on the temperature in your home, the climate that you're in. The size of the plant will obviously define how much water it needs and how regularly it needs watering. So as I said, sources differ when it comes to watering these. Some say to keep the soil evenly moist throughout, whereas others say to let the top of the soil dry out between waterings. Now I generally go for the second option, and that's how I've got this plant where it is today. Sometimes I even forget to water at all and let the pot dry out completely. That is not by intention, that's just forgetfulness. But what you'll notice if you underwater these, they might go a little bit droopy, provided it's not been too long between waterings, and you can give them more water and they'll perk back up again. If you overwater these, that's where you start to get the issues. If it's sitting in wet soil, for example, that's when you start to get issues with these. So firstly, you might get things like root rot, stem rot, those sorts of things which will kill the plant off altogether. You might start to notice leaf drop, the common thing of yellowing of the leaves, for example, with overwatered plants. But one of the paradoxical things that happen with these plants is when you overwater them, they actually show signs of that you might misinterpret as underwatering. So they start to go dry and crispy and brown, so they almost look like the leaves are burnt. And you might actually think that's maybe a humidity issue or an underwatering issue. Then you inadvertently carry on watering it to obviously rectify that issue, or maybe even keep watering it but move it into a place with more humidity to try and solve the humidity issue, but actually it's the overwatering. So if you notice any browning on the leaves that looks like burning or crisping or dropping of the leaves, if you know you're watering it correctly, actually start to reduce the water, because it could be the watering that is the issue. And then hopefully once you get the watering balance right, the rest is very easy to look after this plant. So final tip with watering, if you do have them in decorative pots, then let them take up what they need, maybe half an hour for example, and then remove any excess water so they're not sitting in that excess water. If you do take them out of the pots anyway to water them, then water drainage shouldn't be an issue. So watering always leads nicely onto soil, as that can help you with the drainage and moisture retention depending on what you need. So for plants in the Araceae family, they generally like a chunky mix that is well draining with a little bit of moisture retention. So you might use something like a mixture of soil with some perlite for drainage, maybe a bit of coconut coir to maintain some of that moisture, or you could use something like bark, that's quite popular, to give it a bit of a chunkier texture, so it's going to be really well draining, nice aerated soil, and you're hopefully going to reduce the risk of accidentally overwatering it. So when it comes to lighting, these generally like a spot with bright indirect light, that's their optimal position, but they will be okay in a spot with indirect light as well. However, just be mindful if you do notice your leaves are maybe coming out small, maybe they're not developing fenestrations, or maybe it's just growing a bit slowly, then it could be that it's not getting enough light, so bring it into a spot with more brighter light but still bright indirect. So this is in a spot set away from a south-southwest facing window, so this gets direct sun throughout the day, but it's, as I said, set a bit further back. It's behind some of these other plants, so this is a really good spot for this, as you can see the strength of the growth with this and these wonderfully developed leaves. But what you should avoid is direct sunlight, so if it was a bit too close, it could actually scorch the leaves. Like many of the houseplants, it won't do well with bright direct sunlight. So a spot with bright indirect light, and again you should have really nicely formed fenestrated leaves and a fast growing Rhaphidophora. So as I do with some of my other complete care guides for plants, I've grouped the temperature and humidity together as they're relatively easy for the Rhaphidophora. So they do like a warmer temperature, so maybe between 15 degrees Celsius and 25 degrees Celsius, give or take a couple of degrees either way, and That's probably because they come from a naturally warmer habitat anyway, but our home should generally be within that temperature range, unless you're from a very cold place or you get cold snaps with certain seasons, or cold spots in your home where this could be. You might then want to move it during those times to a warmer spot, but generally our home should be within that range. Then when it comes to humidity, they generally like high humidity if you think of their natural habitat, which might be quite humid. However, they are okay with the humidity normally found in our homes. So I've not done anything special with this, although it is amongst quite a lot of other plants. That might help it, but I've not got a humidifier in this room. So if you do have a generally dry air in your home, maybe you've got an air conditioner, you've got radiators that are on often, maybe when it comes to winter and you do have the radiators on more, you might need to consider humidity for these plants if you do notice you've got dry air. If you notice the leaves starting to crisp or any issues from the humidity, then you might need to put a humidifier in to help it, or possibly put it amongst other plants to increase the localised humidity. Generally, it should be okay if your house is generally quite balanced when it comes to humidity. So then when it comes to fertiliser, as these are fast growing plants, when they are in their optimal conditions, they do benefit from a feed every now and again. So I will generally give them a feed once a month as part of the watering schedule. So I use a water soluble all-purpose fertiliser that is also suitable for houseplants, and then just mix that in as I'm watering the plants. And I'll do that during the active growing season only. But then when we get into the colder months, which we're starting to go into now, mid-autumn into winter, I'll stop using the fertiliser. So I used it maybe about a week ago, so that's the last time I'll fertilise this plant, and then I'll pick it back up again in the spring when they start to actively grow again. So then when it comes to propagating, generally you want to propagate during the active growing season to increase your chances of success. However, I did just say we're coming to the end of that here in the UK, but I'm still going to try propagating just to show you how to do this with the Rhaphidophora. And you'll note if you've watched any of my previous videos, I like to try to propagate any time of year depending on the plant material that I've got. So if I've maybe pruned a plant or maybe damaged it by accident, I will always try to propagate it regardless of whether it is in the active growing season or not. It just means that if it's not, my chances of success might be a little bit lower than it would be if it was in the active growing season. So we're still going to try to propagate the Rhaphidophora in just a moment. And I do currently have a lot of propagations on the go at the moment. If you've not seen my previous video, I got 2 mystery propagation boxes with 13 different plants in there, some really special ones in there too. So I think that at the end, if you want to watch that next and you like propagation or mystery unboxing videos, then watch that next. So now moving on to propagating the Rhaphidophora. So we're going to take a stem cutting in just a moment, as that's the easiest way to propagate these. There are a few things that you need to get started. So if you're using the water method, you'll need some clean water in a clear container ideally, so you can see if it's developing roots over time. You'll need some clean cutting utensils, so scissors, knife, secateurs, something like that to take the cutting with. If you're using the soil method, then you need some fresh soil in a clean container, and if you want to, it's optional, you can use some rooting hormone to try and increase your chances of success. So I'm going to show you the water one first of all, and what I'm going to do is, if I just put this down, take a cutting of the plants. We're going to take the stem cutting, and what you're looking for is a piece of stem with various leaf nodes on it, as that's where the roots will develop, and this is a perfect piece of stem. So we've got a really nice long piece of stem. There are lots of leaves coming off it and points where those have come off. There's even aerial roots, and I can see there's some nodes where the leaves have come off there, and there's even a new leaf coming up at the top, so I could possibly get a couple of different propagations off of here. So all I'm going to do is take the cutting about an inch or so underneath where one of the leaves have been. So we've got the different sections of the stem there, and I'm going to take the cutting about an inch below where one of the leaves are, and taking that off. I will tidy this up in a second and put that back up so it's a little bit tidier and not just hanging off the other plants. So here is my cutting, but rather than use that as just one cutting, I'm actually going to get, I could possibly even get 3 cuttings out of that actually, but I think I will try 2 for the purposes of the video. So I'm going to take one of the cuttings from the very top, so again just below where one of the leaves have come off, and there's some aerial roots there, and then that bit is the bit that's going to go in the water in just a second, just to cut this so that I don't actually cut myself as well. So I've got one cut in there, and then I've got another 1 or 2 here. I think I'll do this as just the one so it's a little bit easier. So to prepare the stem for propagation, all I've done is remove the lower leaf, and now we've got a clear stem with a clear leaf node on there, and that just needs to go into water, so it's as easy as that. So all I'm going to do is take my clean water and pop that in there, and then leave that in there and wait until root starts to develop. And all I need to do again is change the water every week maybe, just to keep the water fresh and stop any nastiness building up in there, and then wait until I get roots. And what I could even do with this one is the water level, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, the water level is almost at the second node, so I could always increase the water level, and then there's a possibility of getting roots in both locations. but I'll leave it as it is for now. And then once it does develop roots of maybe 1 centimetre or 2 long, and it's got a nice sort of cluster of roots, then I can pot it up in some fresh potting soil of the mixture that we spoke about earlier. That is maybe a little bit on the chunkier side with good drainage and a little bit of moisture retention. And then we've got a free Rhaphidophora Tetrasperma. So then when it comes to the soil method, all you need is some fresh potting mix and a second cutting. So we've got the second one from the piece that we took earlier. This is the top of the stem, and all I've done is exactly the same, taken the lower leaf off. So we've got a clear piece of stem with the leaf node at the bottom. And then all I'm going to do is use a pen, you can use anything, to make a hole in the soil so that it's wide enough and deep enough for the stem to go in so that the leaf node is covered. And then once I've done that, I can just pop this straight into the soil. Let's get rid of this pen before it gets in the way. And then all you need to do is just firm the soil around the cutting so that it's held securely in place and give it a water. And then what I'll do with this is slightly different to the usual watering schedule I'll use for this. With propagations, I'll generally water a little bit more often and keep the soil moist, because I think that generally helps with the success of the propagation, but only with these, not with the plant once it's established. I'll reduce the watering and only water when the top of the soil is dry. So now that is potted up in the soil, I'll put this in a space that is generally quite warm with some indirect light, and as I said, keep the soil moist, and then hopefully we'll start to see either new growth and it'll stay healthy, or if you give it a gentle tug, you'll know whether it stays anchored in the soil, if it's developed roots or not, or if it comes out, then obviously it's not. But so long as this stays healthy and this stays green and doesn't show any signs of rot or anything like that, I will be patient and leave it in the soil. It can take a while for roots to develop, particularly with this method. It might be a little bit faster with the water method. But as I said, so long as this stays healthy, leave it in the soil, keep watering it, try and keep it as happy as possible, and hopefully you'll get a new Rhaphidophora Tetrasperma plant for free. I hope you found that useful in learning more about the Rhaphidophora Tetrasperma and how to care for it to help it grow to the same heights as this one, and also how to propagate it to grow your plant collection for free. If you've got your own tips, then please do share them in the comments below. I'd love to see them, but I'm sure other viewers will find them useful too. If you'd like to see my other propagations from the mystery propagation box I spoke about earlier, I'll link that video at the end to watch next. There's a really cool Halloween themed box in there too, which I'm sure you'll find really fun and interesting. If you have found this video useful, please consider subscribing. I have new videos every week, usually on plant related topics, and if you've got any questions, put them in the comments below and I'll respond to everyone. And as always, thank you for watching Grow Your Wellbeing.